Right, the bitter end. And it feels like that after Stephen's wonderful exploration of the part that I think is most interesting, the colourful part about the pedagogy and the integration with the learner, which I think is the real purpose we're all together. And often we talk about WIL, work integrated learning, or education for practice, and all those terms. That's at the heart of it and what we're interested in. But I guess one of the things I've learned over I thought it was about the last 5 or 6 years, but when I thought about it and added up the time, it's probably about 15 years that I've been exploring and researching practice learning for practice, and that there's a lot of other things that we have to take care of. So I'm bringing it back to a terribly pragmatic point. So it seems almost sinful following that lovely creative piece, Stephen. But what I did halfway through last year was I looked at a lot of the projects that had been funded by the ALTC. So I'm going to use that as a basis for what I will talk about now. And one of the things I was struck by, a personal experience I had in my other life, I actually worked with a women's program in India on a mountaintop, 7,000 feet above sea level in the south of India. And after 25 years, it's now just not a non-formal education program, but it's become a community college in the last couple of years. And through the request of the women, they learn about handling computers, they learn about designing their own clothes, they learn about how to take care of children with disabilities, and how to be office workers. And these programs are now accredited by the Indira Gandhi National Open University. So we've come a long way in 25 years. But I found myself sitting in a meeting with a lot of employers in this room, and we were talking about the program and the graduates of the new program. Now it's a community college. And they were wanting to take these women on as interns to give for careers, not jobs, and how we would design the course around it. And I really had to pinch myself, because the conversation I would be having with you, but here it was in a mountaintop, in not much more than a shed, with people that had large organisations in southern India about tribal and Dalit women. And so the issues we are struggling with are actually worldwide issues in education. So move on from that. That was probably me just trying to make this a bit more interesting. It was actually at the time. So when, I'll just go back a bit to it, there's 3 words in there that I think are important. That when we looked at the programs, I was trying to make sense of it because we funded a lot. And I was trying to think, what did we achieve when I sat back from these 40 projects and all the others that I was wondering why they weren't there because I'd heard about them or experienced them over a couple of years. What were some of the things I could distill from it which were core issues, which is why I thought of that other example. There were institutional issues that we need to attend to. There are educational issues and there are partnership issues. There's going to be much more than that, but it seemed to me they were 3 big clusters of issues that we needed to deal with. When looking at the institutional elements and going through the projects, there were things that people were saying were really important. And I won't karaoke it all, but some of these other things we talk about often is having a clear, shared vision of what WIL or education for practice is about. Why are we doing it? Its purposes and expectations. And part of our problems is that we often haven't come to a shared understanding, and which I think is why David's encouraging us to look at our language and the way we're using the terms and what is implied within that. And a really realistic recognition of the systems and infrastructure and the provision of adequate resources. So where does this all fit? It's all very well that now we've moved from the cottage industry to having vice-chancellors that are interested to stay and be in this dialogue. What does that actually mean now in terms of if it's going to be visible, how do we see it in the organisation? I go to many a website of a university to have a look at it and find things about IT. But can I find the word? If I can find learning and teaching, I'm really pleased. If I can find anything to do with education for practice working other than a marketing term, I'm quite shocked. It's not visible in the big picture we provide of universities. We need to have recognition and legitimation of the disciplinary communities, of the practice-generated knowledge, and the distinctive and complementary roles of the university in the workplace in shaping and supporting the learning. And I'm conscious with both of these of things I've learnt from both David and Stephen. With the recognition of will, I remember David back in the 90s when you were looking at work-based learning, so education that was actually happening in the workplace, telling us and reminding us we need to be clear what we are as universities. What do we mean when we say we're a university? What are we offering in society? Because unless we've worked that out, if we go then have degrees that are occurring and legitimating the work and the learning out in the workplace, what are we saying about us? And I think we're back to that point again. Today, the last 2 days, I've been thinking of that thing you said then. And then this next one of legitimising the what has to happen between the workplace, with a lot of Stephen's recent writings about there is a place for us in this discussion. And what we're doing is being desperate about finding the placements and have we got enough places that will take the students. And one of the things we ignore is after the placement, after the student has had the experience, how do we sit down and help them make meaning of that experience and generate an explicit knowledge of practice, an explicit practice knowledge, creating knowledge out of reflection on that experience. And I don't know what it's like in your places, but where I've gone and had a careful look at programs to do with practice learning, all our efforts around getting the placements, getting the students out, hoping it's safe practice while it's out there, that the students are having a legitimate experience, but when they come back in, there isn't that chance for them to deconstruct and to make new meaning, to create their own practice-based knowledge. And I still think it's there, a major issue for us. And I remember we identified this in 1988 and 99 in our studies then. And how do we work with engaging and utilising institutionally provided enabling services like the career services? How do we work with them so that they're part of the partnership about doing these placements where the students' practice-based experiences that happen as legitimate places within the curriculum are actually also augmented and supported by the support of the career services. So the educational elements are about having some specific learning outcomes. That to me seems self-evident, but all too often I'm still, like tomorrow when I go and talk with the people in architecture, it's about putting them out to have internships. But where's the reason why? And just what's the intention behind that? What are the learnings that will come from them having these internships? It sounds like a good thing because everybody's doing it. And I keep thinking we should have moved beyond that. But I think part of the problem is that we keep meeting and there are a lot of people that we don't meet with, that we need to have this conversation with. Students need to be prepared, and those are some of the things that we can do generically, I think, and provide resources for. And I think we need to, one of the things that was really interesting that came in the studies in several of the projects was how much students valued the element of risk in the placement. Yet one of the things we're most anxious about is the element of risk. But if we don't have risk in it, there isn't the learning. If it's that they can just go out and smoothly be there where there is no problem, nothing they need preparation for, there isn't a challenge within it, then there is no learning. And all that effort and cost of finding the placements, getting the support is wasted. So how do we balance risk against some kind of support and security? And I think there are many opportunities, and it came out again time and again in the studies, in the projects, of where we're beginning to utilise technologies in quite innovative ways. But they're all such small projects. And they start for a while, they stay there while the person that thinks it's a great idea, and they stay there. The minute they move on, and gone. And it's done in one program or one institution. And we're not collectively joining together to say, how do we utilise these amazing new opportunities and systematically, as a sector, start to embrace some of those ideas and build on them. And the partnerships, I think we haven't begun to deal. There were some great ideas that came out in the projects, and I'm not going to go through them all or any of them, but if they're listed in the report if you want to go and have a look, where people have done some beginning work. But once again, it hasn't been systematically brought into the institutional infrastructure, and my fear with most of them is when those people who have innovated and have done that move on, so will the richness of those partnerships. So we've got to look at putting them into the system. Trying to make sense of it all, and I think I came up with a beginning idea of this at the last summit, and I've sort of refined it a little, but I really want this critiqued. But I was trying to, so if anyone wants to criticise it or give me some feedback, I'd appreciate it. But what we tried to do was say, look, this notion of practice-based learning or work-integrated learning where some part of students' experience is, and part of their course is about preparing them for practice, and some of it might be them going through using simulations or simulated situations or out-of placement. These are some of the things that come to play. So there's domains. We need to look at leadership and management, and some of the projects are now beginning, particularly I think the last lot, there's several being funded about leadership and management. But we need to think about what that really means and how that becomes visible within the institutions. Of course, education is at the heart of it. That's what brings us here. And a lot of the projects were about an aspect, a small aspect of that. And the partnerships, and then the contexts. Context can mean many things. The rural and remote issues, I think, are really important. The notions of simulation or not. Whether we have students going in offshore to international placements. Whether what we do about our international students coming so they understand. So context could be quite a diverse range. And here are the kind of dimensions of those down the other axis that you've probably gone ahead. Purpose, I think, is something for us to think about. Curriculum and pedagogy, I think that is well and alive in our interests, but I don't think I think we need a clearinghouse, basically. So people are not going on developing projects that seem like a good idea, but if you really look at it, so-and-so over in the other state did a beginning part of that, and they got almost through what they said they would in the project, but the funds ran out and they had to sort of wind it up, and they didn't do the last evaluation bit or something like that. So it seemed to me like a lot of the projects were happening apropos of nothing, as if they were the first one doing that particular project. They would all have really good literature reviews. They'd gone to the literature and drawn upon the scholarly literature, but it wasn't turning to what other projects might have happened, that they would have made contact with those people, found out their experiences and built upon them. The legal and ethical matters really don't seem to touch our projects very often, and we really need to think about those. Infrastructure provision, I won't go on, but I really, the day I open up a website and find that it's really clear about that this is going on in the university, I will open a very good bottle of champagne from home. I don't think it fits very much into our quality assurance systems yet. When I look at evaluation, student evaluations or any other evaluation system, the discussions about learning, it seems to me it's all still about, and policies, it's about classroom learning. It's about classroom learning that's in the social sciences often. It doesn't account for the diverse locations of learning, including that learning that occurs out in practice-based contexts. When I take a deep look at assessment policies, if you really look at the language under it, they don't reflect this dimension of learning, and we need to start looking at our whole systems taking this into account. I'll leave you that you've probably gone ahead and read those others. So very quickly, some things that I thought we learned from it that when we looked at all the projects, we'd say the things that seem most obvious to us, that students need to be prepared and self-test, do a lot of work that prepares themselves, but we need to put the resources there. There's a need to have clear expectations of what the university and the organisations are expecting of them. They need the challenge, as I mentioned. There's reflection and debriefing on learning, where we take our real responsibility in the learning process to help to be in charge of these. And that there is leadership development at the micro practice level. And some lovely work happened up in Queensland in nursing, where they gave, had groups that were looking at leadership in this practice setting. But it stayed just there at this stage. I haven't seen its evolution into other areas. I think there were some exemplary practices. His first name escapes me. He got the fellow in Cameron, Ian Cameron, did some brilliant work in engineering, where they built a simulation of a refinery. And so students could go on and get a whole lot of simulated experience about working in a refinery. They did it in deep collaboration with the sector, their partners in industry. So much so that those industry partners now use it to do ongoing training of their own staff and just safety checkbacks that they're all au fait with the rules. But it's a wonderful resource. But why I mention that one, and like several of the others that are there, is Ian's project came from a collaboration. He got a senior fellowship. He brought in a lot of other academics who were interested, both overseas and Australian and New Zealand scholars. He had a long time to develop up the theories and the ideas about what he was doing and to do the research. He was well resourced, and he worked with the industry partners over a long time. So where we have a lot of projects that are just brief, they get just over $100,000, which is a lot of money, but they only get 18 months to do it. It takes 6 months to really work out, gosh, we got that grant. What did we say we would do? Is that really doable? Let's frame it so it is. There you've lost 6 months. Then you get your resources together and you've only got 12 months to try and get it done. That isn't the way and the space to do it. But the really resoundingly good projects, and the work that Stephen did with multi-institutional people across the IRUA universities, where they had Stephen as their mentor, their guide. There they weren't starting from scratch. There were a lot of small projects, but they came together and they were able to talk about the meaning in it. So you're getting my drift, that the kinds of things that shone out for me in these 40 projects were ones that drew upon beyond a single grant. They needed a lot of, if they were really serious about it, it needed serious funding, serious scholarship that's sustained and not an 18-month short journey. There were some lovely things like Kay Edgecombe wasn't a funded project, but came out in the review study I did, where over a space of 5 years, she set up dedicated education units in hospitals, on wards, where they became part of the education learning process. But when the administration at the university changed at Flinders, in the School of Nursing, so also went that project. But you can see it in Queensland, you can see it in New South Wales, you can see it in Canberra, you can see it in the United States, you can see it in Canada, and they are still really interested in it. Sort of like you can't profit in your own land, I suspect, but it's still that fragility of good innovation, of it only lasting a short time. I think the group that really, there were several groups that explored interprofessional practice. They've done some great beginning work, but unless the funding can continue on that work, that also needs a lot more work. The ideas are being fleshed out, but its implementation, its actualisation is just not there yet. We try it, but we're doing trial and error rather than a systematic, clear approach to knowing what our goal is in that. What does it mean when you graduate and you're interprofessionally literate or competent? Those sort of things, we need to do a lot of work. And Sue McAllister's work that got quite a lot of funding in speech pathology on assessment in the clinical placement has affected all the speech pathology schools because they were all involved. So it was systematic and across the whole sector, and also has been taken up offshore. So these were development, and then there was some research. And in particular, I was very impressed at the research that came out of, I think it's RMIT, on education and the assessment of students, how you would assess students out in their placements in schools. Some really great questions raised using the teacher registration board competencies and their investigation, finding about where all this falls short, that nobody's really talking about the same things when they're talking about assessment. And there are strategies around that. But we need not one university to do it, but it needs to be an uncompetitive, cooperative, at least state-based. Let's get everybody, all the teachers in this state, knowing how to talk about practice with students about what really matters. This is getting exhausting. I was at another forum just before I started to do the review, and one of the things, it was on Will in Victoria, and one of the things they really called upon was to have it, rather than everybody trying to reinvent the wheel, which we've still pretty well got a cottage industry in as much as each university is trying to do its own thing, that we needed a set of principles to guide us. And they talked about one on teaching communication and language skills. But I think we've already got some. The things that Stephen came out of his senior fellowship on his guides for curriculum and pedagogy is one set that we have. Also, Papadopoulos, who's in business, came out with a wonderful set of principles to guide different contexts of working out in business and in industry. But I think we need to do a lot more work, and after looking at all the projects, I'm not going to go through these, they're just there and you'll get and it's in the report, I took it out. I pulled these together from looking at all the projects and the kinds of things we've found from research, but I think we need some cross-sector serious discussion about if we were to guide and have a set of principles to guide us, what might they be? Where would they come from? How would we be able to justify them? So what next? I actually think we need to seriously develop a systematic agenda for research. Not look at what funds are out there to get for research, but as a group, if we could have a forum like this where we say, where are the gaps? If we go back to that model, tear my model of all the elements apart and say, what are the bits where we think are high priority? What's the research we need to have done? Not the development, because a lot of that development is happening anyway, because people are passionate, they want it to work well, and they're doing that. But we need to actually have the agenda for research, so when the funds become available, we've got the kind of research groups that have got the expertise together who can collaboratively do that research. And it might be a big research agenda with pieces that actually fit together. The model in my head is the SAGWIG group in the UK that have been researching assessment for the last 15 years. And they don't do their research in one university. They will pick a good question that they know that people need, and they'll research it across 6 or 7 universities and come out with some, very robust phenomena. And we've got a really good collaboration going across the ditch that I think we could actually get together a body of people that could steer this, but it doesn't mean it's exclusive to that group, but makes it open to others to join in. But they all talk, the pieces of research all talk to each other. I think we need to move on from the Fordist single studies, single institution, single disciplinary studies of either development or research, and move on to multidisciplinary, multi-institutional research program. And there, I'll stop there.